A human defended her child. The alien mother refused to let him go. Alina Carter stood still in the dense woods, her breath visible in the cold air, her eyes scanning the landscape. Max, her 6-year-old son, was crouched beside her, carefully inspecting the small, bright flower he had picked. The planet they lived on was beautiful but unpredictable. They had come to study the alien flora, but today, the peace of the colony was far behind them. The air smelled like wet earth, and the tall trees rustled gently in the breeze. The sky above was a soft shade of purple, casting an unusual light on everything. The world seemed quiet, almost too quiet. Alina adjusted the straps on her backpack and glanced over at Max. "We need to move, honey. We don't want to stay too long here." Max nodded but seemed distracted by something in the distance. His small hands gripped the flower tightly, but his gaze was fixed somewhere else. Alina followed his eyes but saw nothing unusual. A low growl broke the silence, a sound so strange that it sent a chill down her spine. Alina's training kicked in. She had been warned about the wild creatures on this planet, things that could hunt and track with an almost unnatural skill. But she never expected to encounter anything like this. She turned to Max, her voice sharp. "Get behind me, Max, now!" Max hesitated but obeyed, stepping closer to her. His tiny frame pressed against her leg, and Alina quickly scanned the surroundings. That growl had come from deeper in the forest, just beyond the clearing. Whatever it was no friend. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she tried to make out any movement through the thick trees. Her heart raced, and her instincts told her to run, but she couldn't leave without knowing exactly what they were up against. She slowly crouched down, taking out a small scanner from her pack. The device beeped softly as it detected some sort of heat signature nearby. Something large. The growl grew louder, and then out of the shadows a figure emerged, a massive alien creature. The Scifists were tall, with sleek black skin and sharp, angular features. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and they moved with the grace of a predator. Alina had studied them before, just enough to understand they were not creatures to be taken lightly. The alien stepped forward, its eyes locking onto Max, and before Alina could react, it extended one long arm and snatched Max up by the wrist, pulling him away from her. She screamed, a rush of panic flooding her chest as she tried to grab Max, but the creature was too fast, too strong. "Max!" Alina shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached for the blaster on her belt, but her hands were shaking. The Scifi was already retreating into the woods, its long legs carrying it effortlessly. Max kicked and screamed, struggling in the grip of the creature, but his small hands were no match for its strength. Alina's mind raced. She couldn't let them take him. Not again. Not after everything she had gone through to get to this colony. She took a deep breath and fired her blaster. The shot rang out, striking a nearby tree, but the creature didn't seem to notice. It was too focused on Max, who was now dangling in its grasp. Alina charged forward, her pulse pounding in her ears. She fired again, this time hitting the creature in its side, but it only flinched. It turned its head, eyes narrowing as it looked at her. There was a brief moment of stillness, and then the Scifi spoke in its own alien tongue. The voice was low, almost melodic, but Alina couldn't understand a word of it. The creature's eyes glowed brighter as it growled again, tightening its grip on Max's arm. "No," Alina screamed, her throat raw with fear and desperation. "Let him go!" But the Scifi didn't respond. Instead, it seemed to consider her for a moment before turning its back, walking deeper into the forest with Max still held tightly. Alina watched helplessly, her heart breaking as she saw her son being carried away. She didn't know who or what this creature was, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let it take Max without a fight. She might be alone here in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by an alien world, but nothing was going to stop her from protecting her son. Alina ran after them, ignoring the pain in her legs as she sprinted through the thick trees. The leaves and branches whipped at her face, but she barely noticed. Max's cries echoed in the distance, each one a dagger to her heart. She could still hear him, but the Scifi was fast, moving quickly, its long strides carrying it further into the wilderness. Her mind raced. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She had come here to study, to learn from this alien world. But now it seemed like she had stepped into a nightmare. She didn't know where the Scifi were taking Max or why, but she couldn't think about that now. She had to get him back. Through the trees, Alina could see the faint outline of a large, towering structure. It looked like a fortress built into the side of a mountain. The Scifi had to be heading there. Alina's heart sank. She had no idea what they wanted with Max or why they were so intent on taking him, but she knew that whatever it was, it couldn't be good. She slowed down, trying to catch her breath. She needed a plan. She couldn't just run in blindly and hope to rescue her son. The Xipherists were stronger, faster, and better adapted to this environment than she could ever hope to be. She had to be smart. She had to think. She crouched down behind a large boulder, peering out over the edge. The Xiphorus was still carrying Max, heading toward the fortress. Alina could hear the faint sounds of the creature's footsteps, steady and unhurried, as if it was certain no one would be able to stop it. But Alina wasn't about to give up. Taking a deep breath, she prepared herself for what was to come. This wasn't the first time she had been in a dangerous situation, and it wouldn't be the last. But she couldn't fail now, not when her son's life was on the line. Max's cries faded as they neared the fortress, and Alina's heart sank with each step they took. But she wasn't done yet. She would find a way to get Max back, no matter what it took. She stood up, eyes locked on the distant structure. This was just the beginning. The Xiphorus had made a grave mistake, thinking they could take her son without consequence. Alina wasn't going to stop until Max was safe in her arms again. Alina had to act fast. Her heart raced as she watched the Xiphorus creature disappear into the trees, its long legs carrying it further and further away. She knew she couldn't catch up if she kept running in a straight line. The creature was too fast and the forest was dense. But Alina was no stranger to challenges. She had been through worse, much worse in her life. Losing Max now was not an option. She took a deep breath and paused, trying to steady her frantic pulse. The sound of Max's voice, high-pitched and filled with fear, echoed through the trees. Her stomach twisted in agony. He was so small, so vulnerable. And she couldn't protect him if she didn't calm down and think clearly. Alina crouched low, hiding behind a large bush, her eyes scanning the forest. The Xiphorus had a head start, but the dense underbrush could slow it down. She might have a chance if she followed carefully and kept her distance. She couldn't afford to make any noise, not even a single snap of a twig. Max's cries faded as the creature moved deeper into the forest. Alina squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to focus. She thought back to everything she knew about the Xiphorus. The humans had only been on this planet for a few months, studying the alien species, trying to learn as much as they could about their ways. Alina was a biologist, and she had spent hours reading reports and data about the Xiphorus. They were a proud race, fiercely protective of their land and families, but the reports didn't mention anything about them taking children. Alina didn't understand why this creature had taken Max. She had to know. She had to find out what was going on. Alina slowly stood up, trying to make herself as small as possible. She peeked around the bush, watching as the Xiphorus continued its journey toward the mountain in the distance. She had to follow. There was no other choice. The path was difficult, tangled with vines and low-hanging branches. Alina's boots scraped against the ground, and she cursed under her breath as she stepped on a dry twig that cracked loudly beneath her weight. She froze, waiting for the Xiphorus to notice. It didn't stop. It was too far ahead now. Alina's eyes flicked nervously from side to side as she hurried forward, hoping that the creature was too focused on its mission to hear her. Minutes felt like hours as Alina pushed through the dense forest, the trees growing taller and thicker around her. The farther she went, the more disorienting the landscape became. The air grew thicker, the ground softer, and she began to feel the weight of the jungle pressing in on her. The fortress was close now. Alina could see its shadow on the horizon, looming against the sky, casting a cold, eerie glow over everything. She slowed her pace as she neared the edge of the clearing, staying low to the ground. There, just beyond the trees, was the Xiphorus creature. It had stopped in front of a massive stone wall that towered over the landscape. The wall was adorned with strange symbols, glowing faintly with a soft blue light. Alina had never seen anything like it before. The Xiphorus was kneeling, placing Max on the ground gently before it. Alina's heart skipped a beat. Was the creature leaving him there? She couldn't be sure, but she wasn't about to take any chances. She had to move closer. But the Xiphorus wasn't alone. A low growl sounded from behind her, making her freeze in her tracks. Alina turned, her breath catching in her throat. A second Xiphorus had appeared from the shadows, moving quickly toward the first one. This new one was smaller, but no less intimidating. Its eyes glowed as brightly as the first, and its gaze locked onto the child. Alina's stomach churned with fear. The second Xiphorus reached Max first, crouching beside him and speaking in a language Alina couldn't understand. It reached out a hand, gently brushing Max's hair, and Alina's heart stopped. The creature was caressing him. Why? What did it want with her son? She couldn't take it anymore. She had to know what was happening. She moved quietly through the trees, staying hidden, her breath shallow and fast. The second Xiphorus stood up, and Alina saw its posture change. It was taller now, its body shifting into something even more dangerous. The creature's eyes met hers for a split second, and she felt a wave of dread wash over her. But it didn't attack. Instead, it turned away, moving toward the stone wall where the first Xiphorus was standing. Alina's eyes followed the movement, and for the first time she saw what they were looking at. A large opening in the wall, a door of sorts, hidden in the shadows. It was wide enough for them to pass through. Max was still on the ground, sitting silently, his eyes wide and filled with confusion. Alina's heart broke as she watched him. She could see the fear on his face, but he wasn't crying anymore. He was silent, looking around as if trying to understand what was happening. Was he being held captive? Was he safe? What did they want with him? The two Xiphorus didn't notice Alina anymore. She was hidden in the trees just a few meters away, her breath caught in her throat as she watched them. Alina could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had no plan, she didn't know what to do. She only knew that she couldn't leave her son behind. She couldn't let them take him. But she had to be smart. If she attacked now, she would never make it out alive. She needed a way to get to Max without alerting them. Her mind raced as she thought of a plan. She had come to this planet for research to study the plants and animals. She had learned so much about the Xiphorus, about their behavior, their communication. Maybe, just maybe, she could use that knowledge to her advantage. She watched the Xiphorus carefully, studying their movements. The first one was talking to the second one, and neither of them was looking at Max. Alina's heart beat in her chest. She had to act now. Taking a deep breath, Alina moved silently from the shadows, her legs trembling but her resolve strong. She had to get to Max. Slowly, carefully, she made her way toward the stone wall. Every step felt like an eternity, but she pushed forward, telling herself that there was no turning back. Finally, she reached the wall. Her fingers brushed against the cold stone, and she pressed herself against it, trying to make herself as small as possible. The Xiphorus were still talking, their backs to her. This was her moment. She looked back at Max, who was sitting on the ground, his small body trembling. He didn't know she was there yet. He didn't know she was coming for him. Alina could feel the heat rising in her chest, the burning need to protect her child. She had to be quick. Just as she was about to step out from behind the wall, a soft noise from the Xiphorus made her freeze. She cursed under her breath, cursing herself for being too eager. She waited, her heart in her throat, until the Xiphorus turned away once more. Then, without another thought, Alina darted out from behind the stone wall, her eyes fixed on Max. Alina's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped into the open. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. Max was just a few feet away, and every second mattered. The stone wall loomed behind her, cold and unyielding, but it didn't matter. She was past that now. The only thing that mattered was getting to her son. She moved swiftly but silently, her feet barely making a sound on the soft earth. The two Xiphorus creatures were still talking to each other, unaware of her approach. Their voices were low and melodious, like a song she couldn't understand. Alina didn't care what they were saying. She had to focus. Max was sitting on the ground, his small form hunched over. He was looking around as if trying to make sense of what was happening. Alina's chest tightened as she saw the confusion in his eyes. She wanted to run to him, scoop him up and hold him close, but she knew she couldn't do that just yet. The Xiphorus were too close. She stayed low, moving as carefully as possible, trying to stay out of sight. The creatures were too distracted, but Alina knew it wouldn't take long for them to sense something was wrong. She couldn't risk making a sound. The only way to get Max was to be quick and silent. When she was only a few steps away, the Xiphorus seemed to notice something. Alina froze, holding her breath. The first creature turned its head, its glowing eyes scanning the area. The second Xiphorus followed its gaze. For a moment, Alina thought they had spotted her. She could feel the tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. But then, just as quickly, the Xiphorus turned back to Max. The moment passed, and Alina let out a quiet breath. They hadn't seen her yet. She moved closer to Max, her heart racing. She could see him now, his small hands clasped tightly around his knees, his face pale and scared. Her throat tightened at the sight. He looked so helpless, so vulnerable. She had to get him out of here. But how? The Xipherists were still standing nearby, talking in their strange language. They didn't seem to be paying much attention to Max, but Alina knew that could change at any moment. If they decided to move him again, she wouldn't have another chance. She had to act fast. Alina's eyes scanned the surroundings, looking for something, anything, that could help her. Her mind raced, her thoughts flashing from one idea to the next. She couldn't just run in and grab Max. The Xipherists were too strong, and if they attacked, she wouldn't be able to fight them off. But then she saw it. A small rock just a few feet away from where Max was sitting. It was large enough to make a noise, small enough to throw without drawing too much attention. Alina's mind raced. If she could distract the Xipherists, she could grab Max and escape before they realized what had happened. Alina took a deep breath, moving slowly toward the rock. Her fingers brushed against it, and she picked it up carefully. It felt heavy in her hand, but she knew she couldn't afford to hesitate. She took a few steps back, lining up the throw, and then, with all her strength, hurled the rock into the woods to her left. The sound of the rock hitting the ground was enough. The Xipherists both turned toward the noise, their eyes scanning the trees. Alina didn't wait to see if they were going to investigate. She ran forward, faster than she had ever moved, her legs pushing her forward with all the strength she had left. Max was still sitting on the ground, looking confused and scared. Alina didn't stop to explain. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands reaching out to grab him. "Max, we have to go now," she whispered urgently. Max's wide eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment he didn't move. His body was stiff with fear, his small face pale. But then he seemed to recognize her, and his lips trembled. "Mom? Yes, baby, it's me. We have to hurry." Alina pulled him into her arms, holding him close. He was light in her arms, but the weight of the situation made him feel heavier than ever. She stood up, cradling him against her chest, and began to back away, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. She had no idea where the Xipherists were or if they had seen her, but she couldn't risk it. She moved quickly but quietly, retracing her steps back toward the trees. Max clung to her, his small arms wrapped tightly around her neck. She could feel the heat of his body against hers, his breath shallow and fast. She could feel the panic in him, the same fear that gripped her heart. Alina didn't stop. She couldn't. Every step was a risk. Every moment could be their last. Suddenly, a low growl pierced the air, and Alina's blood ran cold. She froze in her tracks, her eyes snapping toward the sound. The Xipherists were moving again. She could hear the sound of their footsteps, heavy and deliberate. They were coming closer. Alina's heart raced, and she didn't waste any time. She turned, her legs pumping as fast as they could, and ran. The trees blurred around her as she sprinted through the forest, Max still clutched in her arms. The sound of the Xipherists was growing louder, and Alina knew they were gaining on her. She had to keep moving. The jungle was dense, and the ground was uneven, but Alina pushed through it all. She didn't care about the branches that whipped at her face or the rocks that made her stumble. She only cared about getting Max to safety. She had no idea where she was going, but she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. A loud crack echoed behind her, and she felt something heavy hit the ground just inches from her feet. She didn't look back. She couldn't, but she knew the Xipherists were close now, very close. Max's grip tightened around her neck, and she could feel him trembling. She tried to reassure him, but her voice was barely a whisper. "It's going to be okay, Max. We just have to keep going." But deep down, Alina wasn't sure if it would be okay. The Xipherists were fast. They were strong. And no matter how fast she ran, she couldn't outrun them forever. Her eyes darted ahead, looking for some kind of escape, some kind of safe place. She couldn't see anything but trees. No clear path, no way out. And then, just as Alina thought she couldn't run any further, a clearing appeared ahead. It was small, but it was wide open. There was nowhere to hide, but it was a place she could make a stand. With all the strength she had left, Alina ran for the clearing. She had no idea what she was going to do once she got there, but she couldn't just keep running. She had to face the Xipherists. She reached the clearing, and in that moment the trees behind her rustled. The Xipherists were almost upon her. Alina stopped and turned around, clutching Max close to her. The moment of truth had come. She would fight, or she would die trying. The clearing was still. The air hung thick around Alina as she stood in the center of it, holding Max close to her chest. Her heart was pounding in her ears, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She could hear the Xipherists now, closer than ever. The ground under her feet seemed to vibrate with their heavy steps. There was nowhere to run, Nowhere to hide, she didn't know how much time she had. The Zephyrus could be on her in seconds. She tightened her grip on Max, her mind racing. What could she do? How could she get him to safety? Max, still trembling, buried his face against her neck, his small hands gripping her tightly. He was scared. She could feel his heart beating fast, matching her own. But Alina couldn't let fear control her. Not now, not with Max in her arms. She had to think. The trees around them whispered with the wind, their leaves rustling gently. But it wasn't the wind that Alina was listening to. It was the unmistakable sound of the Zephyrus, their footsteps steady and sure as they moved through the underbrush. They were close, too close. She couldn't outrun them, she couldn't fight them. Her eyes darted around the clearing, looking for anything that could help her. But it was empty, save for the trees surrounding it. There was no cover, no escape, just the cold, hard reality that they were trapped. She could feel her pulse quicken, but she pushed it down. Panic would only make things worse. The first Zephyrus emerged from the trees, its tall, sleek figure almost glowing in the fading light. It was followed by the second, a smaller but equally powerful figure. Both of them moved with grace and speed, their eyes glowing a bright, eerie blue as they scanned the area. They were predators, and they had cornered their prey. Alina didn't move, though every part of her screamed to run. She held her breath, her body tense as the Zephyrus stopped just a few feet away from her. They didn't speak, but their eyes locked onto her with an intensity that sent a chill through her spine. The larger of the two, the one who had taken Max, tilted its head slightly, its glowing eyes studying her. Max whimpered softly in her arms, and Alina tightened her hold on him, trying to keep him quiet. She couldn't let them see his fear. If they saw how scared he was, they would know they had the upper hand. She had to be strong for him, no matter how afraid she felt inside. The Zephyrus stood still for a moment longer, their eyes never leaving Alina. Then, without a word, the larger one reached out and gently pulled Max from her arms. Alina gasped in surprise but didn't try to stop it. She couldn't risk provoking them. She had to think. Max struggled in the creature's grasp, but the Zephyrus held him effortlessly. His little body hung limp, his face pale and confused. Alina's heart broke at the sight. She wanted to scream, she wanted to fight. But she knew that if she did, Max would suffer. She had to stay calm. She had to find a way to get him back. The Zephyrus didn't seem to be in a hurry. They were watching her, studying her, as if waiting for something. Alina didn't know what they wanted, but she was starting to feel the weight of their presence pressing down on her. There was no escape, no way out. She swallowed hard, trying to gather her thoughts. She had to do something, but what? The Zephyrus were strong, they were fast, they could overpower her without breaking a sweat. She had nothing that could stop them, nothing except her mind. Alina's eyes flicked to the stone wall in the distance, the one she had seen earlier. The Zephyrus had taken Max toward it, and she had followed them into the clearing. There had to be something there. Maybe it was a fortress, maybe a holding area, maybe it was a trap. But whatever it was, it had to be important to them. She focused on the Zephyrus, her thoughts racing. If she could just buy some time, maybe she could figure out what was going on. Maybe there was a way to escape, a way to get Max back. But she couldn't do that if she was captured, too. She took a slow, careful step forward. The Zephyrus' eyes followed her every movement, but they didn't react. They were waiting, watching. The larger one, the one who had taken Max, still held him in its grasp, but it was no longer holding him as tightly. Max was silent now, no longer struggling. His small body hung limp, but his eyes were wide, searching the space around him. Alina's mind clicked into place. She couldn't fight the Zephyrus, but she could still use her knowledge. She had been studying this planet, its creatures, its ecosystems, and its people. She knew about the Zephyrus' behavior, their need for respect and understanding. They weren't like humans. They didn't fight unless provoked. They weren't interested in causing harm. They were interested in control. Alina took another slow step forward, this time closer to the Zephyrus. She didn't speak at first. She didn't know what to say, but she had to try. She had to show them that she wasn't a threat, that she was just a mother trying to protect her child. The Zephyrus didn't move, but their eyes never left her. The silence between them felt heavy, thick with tension. Alina took another step. "I'm not your enemy," she said, her voice soft but steady. She wasn't sure if they could understand her, but she had to try. "I just want my son back." For a moment, nothing happened. The Zephyrus just stood there watching her. And then, to Alina's surprise, the larger one let go of Max. The small alien boy was now standing on the ground, staring up at Alina with wide, confused eyes. Alina knelt down slowly, her hands reaching out to him. Max didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice her. His mind was somewhere else, lost in the strange world he had been thrust into. The Xipherists didn't speak, but they didn't make any move to stop her either. Alina moved closer to Max, her hands gently brushing his hair. She felt his trembling form, but he didn't pull away. He was silent now, looking at her with wide, fearful eyes. "It's okay, Max," she whispered. "I'm here, you're safe now." But even as she said the words, Alina didn't know if they were true. She didn't know if she could get them both out of this alive. The Xipherists were still standing around her, waiting. She had no idea what they wanted, but one thing was clear. They were not going to let them go without a fight. Max's tiny fingers clutched her sleeve, and Alina pulled him into her arms once more. She held him close, her mind racing for a way out. They were still trapped. The Xipherists were not going to let them leave without a fight, but Alina was no longer afraid. She was a mother, and she would do anything to protect her son. Alina's heart beat loudly in her chest as she stood in the center of the clearing, holding Max close to her. The Xipherists still circled them, their eyes glowing as they studied her every move. Max's small hands clung to her, his tiny body trembling with fear, but she could feel him starting to calm down just a little. She had him, but the fight wasn't over yet. The larger Xiphorus, the one who had first taken Max, stepped closer. Alina didn't back away. She stood tall, holding Max, her eyes locked on the alien. It seemed to hesitate for a moment, watching her with those glowing eyes. The air between them was thick with tension, and Alina could feel her nerves getting the best of her. But she didn't let it show. She couldn't let them take Max again. "I just want my son," Alina said, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts rushing through her mind. "I'm not your enemy." The Xiphorus didn't answer. It just stared at her, its long limbs standing still in the soft glow of the distant wall. The smaller Xiphorus stayed behind, its posture still, observing everything without a word. The silence stretched on, longer than Alina would have liked. Every second felt like an eternity. Max shifted in her arms, his face pressed against her shoulder, his breathing still shallow but more even than before. Alina felt the soft weight of him, the warmth of his small body against her chest, and it reminded her of everything she had fought for. The only thing that mattered now was getting him back to safety. No matter what the Xiphorus wanted or how dangerous they were, she would not leave without him. The larger Xiphorus took a step forward, its glowing eyes narrowing. Alina's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't help the fear that crept up, but she fought it back, focusing only on Max, holding him as close as she could. "We are not your enemy," Alina said again, a little louder this time. "Please." There was another long silence. The Xiphorus didn't respond. But this time, Alina saw something in its eyes, something that wasn't just cold and calculating. There was a flicker of doubt, a hesitation, as though the creature was considering her words. Alina didn't move, didn't break eye contact. She knew that this was the moment. If she pushed too hard, it could go wrong, but if she showed weakness, it could also be the end. She had to find a way to reach them, to make them see that she wasn't a threat, just a mother desperate to protect her child. Max shifted again in her arms, his small fingers twitching. He was still scared, but he was no longer completely lost in his fear. Alina held him tighter, pressing her cheek against his. The Xiphorus didn't say anything, but the larger one made a soft noise, almost like a sigh. It tilted its head, and for a moment Alina thought it might speak, but instead it stepped back, its eyes flicking to the smaller Xiphorus behind it. The two of them exchanged a silent look, one that Alina couldn't understand. But whatever it was, it didn't feel like an immediate threat. The larger Xiphorus turned back to Alina, and this time it reached out with one long arm. Alina held her breath, bracing herself. But instead of taking Max, it touched his shoulder gently, a soft and almost delicate gesture. It wasn't violent. It wasn't forceful. It was as if it were trying to communicate something Alina didn't fully understand. Max looked up at the Xiphorus, his eyes wide, still unsure but no longer as afraid. Alina could feel the tiny spark of hope igniting inside her, the possibility that they weren't going to hurt him, that they weren't going to take him away again. The Xiphorus didn't make a move to take Max back. Instead, it stepped back again, giving Alina and her son space. She didn't lower her guard, but she felt a slight shift in the air. Something had changed. The tension had loosened just a little. "Please," Alina said once more, her voice soft but firm. "I'll do anything, just let us go." For the first time, the Xiphorus spoke, its voice deep and resonant. Alina didn't understand the words, but there was no mistaking the tone. It wasn't hostile, it wasn't threatening. It was a statement, an understanding. Alina stood frozen, not knowing what to do next. She glanced down at Max, who was still clinging to her, his eyes wide, looking at the Zephyrus as though he, too, was trying to figure out what was happening. He was no longer crying. He wasn't struggling. He was watching, waiting for something. The Zephyrus stepped back again, and this time it turned toward the stone wall, its movements slow and deliberate. It was walking away from them, heading toward the dark entrance of the structure. Alina's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to follow, to run after Max, but she knew better. The Zephyrus were still too dangerous. They might let them go now, but she couldn't take that chance. Not yet. She glanced at the smaller Zephyrus, who remained still, watching the scene unfold. For the first time, she noticed something in its eyes: curiosity, wonder. It was as though it was trying to understand her, trying to understand why she wasn't running or fighting. Alina's chest tightened as she tried to make sense of what was happening. What did they want? What did this mean? Could they really let her go? The larger Zephyrus stopped at the entrance to the structure and turned back to face Alina. Its glowing eyes locked with hers, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Alina could feel the weight of that gaze, as if it was waiting for something. Finally, the Zephyrus spoke again, its voice softer this time, almost like a warning. Alina didn't understand the words, but there was a clarity in its tone. It wasn't a threat, it was an instruction. Alina nodded slowly, understanding that she was being given an opportunity. But she wasn't going to leave without Max. She wasn't going to take any chances. She stepped forward cautiously, holding Max close to her chest. They had given her this chance, but she had to take it carefully. She didn't know if they were letting her go or just waiting for her to make a mistake. The larger Zephyrus didn't move, but its eyes followed her every step. Alina turned to Max, speaking softly to him. "We're going to be okay, Max. We're going home." Max nodded slowly, his small hand reaching up to touch her face. The trust in his eyes made Alina's heart swell. He was safe, for now at least. Alina turned back to the Zephyrus, who had not moved. The larger one nodded slowly, and then it turned, walking toward the entrance of the structure. Alina didn't wait. She took Max's hand, and together they started walking back toward the forest, away from the Zephyrus and the strange, alien world they had been thrust into. They weren't free yet, but they were alive. They were together, and that was enough for now.